Hello and welcome to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. I'm Helly and I'm here to provide regular bursts of information and inspiration, some neuroscience applicable to eating disorder recovery, perhaps a few rants, but otherwise lots of positivity with a bit of a feck it attitude, some fun and a sprinkling of fabulousness to help everyone find freedom in recovery. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. So if you can hear something rumbling away in the background of this episode, I'm sorry about that. I've got a little dog with me at the moment and she's just chosen this moment to start gnawing on her little bone type thing that she's got, and it's making a kind of grinding noise under the table. So if you can hear that in the background, that's all it is. Don't worry about it. It's not me. It's the dog, honestly. Okay, so this episode then is called Ingredients for Eating Disorder Recovery, because choosing to recover isn't enough. So I'm going to talk to you about what I see as some really key ingredients that you need to put in place for your recovery to make your chances of success that much higher than they would otherwise be. So it's often said that to successfully recover from an eating disorder, you need to want it enough. You need to commit to it. And ultimately, you need to choose recovery. And those flippant statements are too often made as if that's all that's necessary for someone to then sail through a quick process of eating disorder recovery and out the other side, job done, just like that. All you ever needed to do was commit to it and want it enough. Well, I'm sure you're thinking, God, why didn't I think of that? I could have done that years ago. Yeah, it's not that simple, is it? It's really not that simple, because I know I desperately wanted recovery for years, and I would have said I was choosing to recover each and every time I committed to treatment or any of my other recovery attempts. But despite how much I wanted it and how committed I felt, the freedom from the eating disorder that I was desperate for just continued to elude me. So to say that you just have to choose recovery, or that if you don't recover, it just shows that you were never committed, is failing to consider the other factors impacting your capacity for change. And it's also disrespectful and demonstrates a lack of understanding and compassion for the person at the centre of all this, and that's you, the person struggling to get through this and really trying to believe in their ability to do this. You can do this, and of course you do need to be committed and to choose recovery, but that's not going to be enough on its own. Because no matter how much you want recovery or how committed you feel, your chances of success will be made more likely by having some other key ingredients in place in your life to make it that much more possible. But yeah, as I say, it's absolutely true that you won't recover if you don't really want to, or if you don't choose it each and every single day. It's a hard and exhausting process, and without that commitment to keep going, it's not going to work. Because after all, if you haven't chosen to commit to the recovery process, then you won't continue to decide to face the necessary challenges each day when the going gets tough, and the necessary brain changes and reprogramming that will take you to a full recovery only come through independent and decisive action. But ultimately, there are many factors, or ingredients as I like to call them, that will impact the success of anyone in eating disorder recovery. So you might not be able to access all of them, and maybe that's okay, because everyone's recovery is different. But the more of these supportive recovery ingredients that you can put in place, the more likely you are to reach the freedom that I know you desperately crave. So I'm going to talk you through some of the ingredients for eating disorder recovery that I see as being really so important to put in place in your life so that you do optimize your chance of success because eating disorder recovery is so incredibly hard. I think a lot of people enter it thinking that they're just going to now choose to eat a lot of food, choose to rest a bit more, gain a bit of weight, and that'll be it, and it will be as easy and simple as that. But if it was as easy and simple as that, wouldn't you have done it years ago? Wouldn't people be recovering from eating disorders in their thousands in ways that they're just not right now? It's not that easy, and you need so much more in place to make it possible. And these are some of the things that you need to put in place. So the first one that I would say is actually quite important is an understanding of eating disorders and how to beat them. Most people with eating disorders are extremely intelligent and have consumed recovery content from every source possible and can quote recovery anecdotes or even research evidence until they are blue in the face. So it's very likely that you already know what you need to do for recovery and why. You likely understand the biology, your high hunger, the need to eat extreme amounts, the concept of weight set point and why overshoot is necessary. It's more than likely that you are extremely well informed already. And if you're not, then I've got a lot of that information in my other podcast episodes, on my blog and in my books. And you will find many other people are putting out other information that's equally informative and helpful. So go and learn it all because it's going to be needed. But having said that, that knowledge alone isn't enough to get you through. But that knowledge is important because when you're hit by the inevitable doubts about the recovery process, or you're struggling to cope with the weight gain and seeking reassurance, then having that background knowledge can be really crucial and helpful. But of course, alongside that, there needs to be more of the ingredients for success. Because knowledge is power to a certain extent. But again, as I say, a lot of you already have all the information, but you're still struggling to actually get recovery done. So the knowledge isn't everything, but it does help. The next thing I would say to put in your recovery ingredients are anxiety management tools. And these are tactics to pull on when the intense fear response sets in as you're trying to override the urges to restrict or compulsively exercise. The fear experienced during the process can be all-consuming and powerful, and it will lead your brain to concoct some very convincing and powerful thoughts or stories for why eating more, resting or gaining weight is a very, very bad idea. That fear and that anxiety and the thoughts it will generate can drive you away from a situation before you've even realised what's happened. So it's therefore really important to find ways to manage the fear and anxiety and recognise the tricks your brain is playing so that you can stay true to your recovery intentions, even when your fight or flight response is peaking. And alongside that, I'd say that understanding habit change is another important thing to be able to get your head around, to be able to understand. Because to overcome an eating disorder, you're going to need to change so many of your daily habits, rituals, and routines. And I often say that recovery necessitates shaking up just about everything in your life, because you need to change so many routines and habits and rituals that pretty much everything gets changed. No stone is left unturned, as they say. And the process involves learning new recovery positive habits to replace the old and deeply embedded disordered ones. And that's likely to impact almost every part of your day. Now, habit change is hard for anyone, no matter what that habit is. And the amount of habit change needed in recovery can be overwhelming. And of course, these aren't just everyday habits. These are addictive and compulsive habits that you are trying to change. So it is 1,000 times harder than just changing a more simple habit in your life. But understanding the steps to take to make habit change easier will make long-term success more likely. And again, I've spoken about habit change in other podcast episodes, and If I haven't made a specific episode about that yet, which I can't remember right now if I have or haven't, then I will. The other thing that I see as really important, and something that people are often a bit reluctant to put in place, is having a support network, a really strong support network and a cheerleading team to help you along the way. Recovery in isolation is incredibly hard. I know, because I tried it too many times and it just doesn't work. Now, of course, I won't say that it's impossible, because I don't want to say that anything is impossible. But I've yet to meet anyone who has recovered from an eating disorder without a support network behind them. Now, what that support network looks like for you will be different than to the support network that someone else might have. So for some, it will involve family, like partners, spouses, parents, siblings, or friends. It might involve health professionals, like GPs, counsellors, nutritionists, eating disorder services, recovery coaches, or other means of professional support. Peer support from others in recovery from eating disorders, support groups, or charitable organisations can also be beneficial and part of your support network and cheerleading team. But having a support network made up of people who are supportive of your chosen recovery approach and who will listen, encourage, motivate you, cheerlead for you, help you with accountability, and be there when it feels that you can't go on, will increase your likelihood of staying on the long recovery path than if you don't have anybody there to support and cheerlead for you. Okay, this next one is a big one. And this is one I have had so many conversations with people about over the last week or two, to the point that I feel like it's the only thing I'm talking about at the moment. But I think that's because it's the thing that makes the biggest difference in whether someone recovers or not. And it's the very thing that people find the hardest to put in place, and also just don't appreciate why it's so important until they do it and then realize why it's so important. And that is having brain space for recovery. I can't emphasize enough just how much brain space it takes to actually bash an eating disorder every single day for as many months as it's going to take to get the eating disorder out of your life. To change your habits, which, as I say, are addictive and compulsive habits, and manage the peaks of anxiety that you're going to get when you do that, you need to be able to fully focus on what you are trying to do. And your brain can't focus on more than one thing at a time. So if you're trying to focus on work, school, and other demands, it's likely that your brain will resort to the automatically habitual eating disorder pathways that it knows so well. And you'll only later realize that the great intentions that you had to have a massive lunch that day have failed yet again. The amount of brain space that recovery demands is intensive, especially at the beginning, but also further down the line. And over time, as you develop more neural pathways in a recovery direction, you will find that you can give a bit more attention to other things again in your life. But the more brain space, by which I also mean life space, you can give yourself for the recovery process, the greater your chance of success. If you are trying to do a job, to run a household, to keep busy, to keep on the go, to have an active social life, to do all these other things and just have recovery as another thing on your to-do list, trust me, you're not going to get very far. You might make the odd slight change here and there, but whenever I see people trying this, they're usually in the same place in 1, 2, or 3 years' time. Still thinking and calling themselves in recovery, but not really. And the eating disorder is still very powerful, although of course to the outside world they look like they're kind of okay because they're just about able to hold a job down. They're just about able to raise a family. They're just about able to go through life independently. But it's not independent, is it? Because you've got an eating disorder that's driving most of your day and it's miserable. So it feels like a sacrifice in the short term to say, okay, I'm going to put my life on hold for a little while. I'm going to stop work as much as I can. I'm going to let other people help me with the household and the children for a little while and really put all my attention onto recovery and make it my top priority for a few weeks and months. But the people who do that are the ones that actually get recovered. So it might feel like a sacrifice in the short term to ask for that help, to put your life on hold in that way. But actually, isn't that sacrifice worth it if that means that actually in 6 months' time you're somewhere near to being recovered, whereas otherwise you're still treading water, desperately trying to keep your head above water in a year's time, but still actually with the eating disorder in control and in charge. It's something to think about. I know it's hard, I know it's difficult, but give yourself that brain space, that life space for recovery, because that can make all the difference or not. So that being said, let's move on to the next ingredient. And the next ingredient is acceptance of weight changes. Now, I'm sure you knew this one was coming, but ultimately to recover from an eating disorder, there needs to be acceptance that your body is going to change. And that means accepting the level of weight gain your body needs to be optimally healthy for you. And nobody can tell you what level of weight gain that is going to be in your situation. Now, you don't have to love the weight gain, but you need to at least tolerate and accept it without attempting to manipulate it. And by that I mean not attempting to manipulate how much you gain, how quickly you gain, or anything else about it. If you try to suppress your weight or control the rate or amount of weight gained, then you won't be doing all that's needed to rewire and reprogram your brain, and a full recovery is very unlikely. And yes, I know that suppressing body weight is a huge part of our modern culture, but it's not healthy or right, and it's only going to keep you stuck and entrenched in the eating disorder if you try to do that. So finding ways to accept your natural body weight and shape without suppressing it and seeking support where necessary is going to be key to a full and lasting recovery, hard though it is. Now, you know that my second book is called Aiming for Overshoot, and there's a very good reason for that. So aim for overshoot in your recovery and you will be going in the right direction. The next thing is distress tolerance. The emotional turmoil and distress that comes with the recovery process is incredibly challenging to put yourself through. And it's often that leads people to ongoing engagement in eating disorder behaviours just to feel better in the moment. Restriction, compensatory behaviours, and other rituals become a means of learnt emotional regulation and a distress tolerance tactic during the years of having an eating disorder. And in fact, the eating disorder becomes the most effective distress tolerance tool anyone will probably ever find. So eating disorders are as powerful as they are because they keep you numb and they stop you feeling the pain that life can otherwise bring you. Therefore, if you want to give up the eating disorder, you have to give up that distress tolerance tool. And that means finding other ways to manage the distress that is inevitably going to come because life doesn't come without distress, unfortunately. So letting go of all those automatic, oh good, now the dog's moved on to the squeaky toy. Apologies if you can now hear squeaking in the background. I think she wants to be part of this podcast. But, okay, so let's move on. So as I say, letting go of those automatic behaviours that are so effective at controlling your emotions, your anxiety and distress, can leave you feeling overwhelmed with a tsunami of difficult emotions, distress, and even trauma. Learning ways to manage the intense emotional roller coaster that will set in is going to be necessary. And these might be commonly taught distress tolerance tools, a crisis plan, people you can talk to, or asking for hugs, and using a therapist or coach. But without the support for the emotional distress that you are going to get, you're likely to find that the eating disorder pulls you straight back when those difficult emotions inevitably arise. The next thing is a solid why to maintain motivation. So to stay on track whenever we do something hard in life, it's crucial to have a strong reason for why we set out to do it in the first instance, to come back to for motivation when things do get tough. So I've spoken before about how important knowing your why is for any difficult goal in life, and there's nothing harder than the goal of eating disorder recovery. Your why can't be something external. So someone giving you £1,000 to recover isn't likely to keep you going because it's not a meaningful enough motivation to your authentic self. Your why needs to be emotional and meaningful to your authentic self. It needs to speak to your true values. It can't be something external to that. Now, at the start of recovery, it can be simple as not being able to tolerate living in the disordered misery any longer and just want to move away from that. But then ultimately, it also needs to become more future focused, encompassing something truly meaningful that you hope for from your free future life. So to succeed at recovery, having a strong and emotive why for what you're doing, build a picture of what you want your life to be that's emotive and that's powerful, that you can keep going back to, is going to make a big difference to keep you motivated and to keep you on the path when it does get tough, because of course it's going to get tough. If it didn't get tough, you'd have done it years ago, as I said before. And of course, it goes without saying that the most important ingredients for recovery success are to abstain from the eating disorder with abundant food, a lot of rest, and not compensating for that. And there's many episodes on all of that earlier on in this podcast series. So, the ingredients for eating disorder recovery that I've spoken about are going to make a real difference to how effective your journey to freedom is. These ingredients are important to come back to and to keep in place throughout the process. As I say, keep coming back to it because it's easy to get so far into the process and feel like life is opening up again, things are feeling a bit more possible, people are starting to look at you and think, oh yeah, look, they're doing really well, they're kind of towards recovery now, and yet you're not there yet. And so you need to keep coming back to these ingredients and making sure that they're all still in place so that you can keep going to the bitter end. But to say that you just have to be committed or you just have to choose recovery isn't enough. Because yes, those factors are important, but those alone aren't going to get you far. If you're attempting to overcome an eating disorder at the moment, then please pull on as many of the ingredients that I've spoken about as you can, and it will make a difference to your recovery success. And please be honest as well about just how many you can add into your mix. And if there's resistance to adding some in, just question where that resistance is coming from, because it's probably not from your authentic and healthy self, is it? The more supportive recovery ingredients you have, the more likely it will be that you continue to eat the volumes of food that you need and to break the compulsive and disordered behaviours and rituals and keep resting so that you find freedom from the eating disorder sooner and not later. Because I want to see all of you thriving and living life now, not still struggling in 2 or 3 years' time. And I know that that's possible for all of you. So, Before this dog that's sitting now by my feet looking at me decides to make any more noise or demand any more attention, I will go and actually pay her a little bit of attention. And to the rest of you, why don't you go and pay your very hungry selves some attention and go and get some food? And then sit down for the rest of the day and give yourself a bit of space to focus on recovery, which means giving yourself the time and space to stop restricting, to stop compulsively doing like a mad thing, and to actually tolerate the distress that's going to come from maybe breaking the eating disorder patterns, but that's going to be very worthwhile in the long run. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. Don't forget, eating disorder recovery doesn't have to be boring and doesn't have to be serious. Now go and grab yourself some food and have a fabulous rest of the day.